So in our last movie, we learned that by right-clicking on any of these files inside of the folder, remember the folder is where all of the files for the page lie. So we've got a CSS folder, images folder, got an index.html, and the one thing that we wanted to take away from our last movie is if you right-click on any HTML file, you can open it with your browser, your favorite browser like Safari or Chrome or Firefox. So this time I'll open it with Firefox. And there we go. Again, here's my web page that we took a look at the last time. And if I close this, you'll notice there's that favicon again. And that is being served up from here, this favicon. So if I were to move this to the trash, or move this, yeah, let's just move it to the trash. Then if I were to open this page up again, let's open it with Firefox. You notice that little favicon is gone now. So without it, you don't see it here. So if you wanted to make your own favicon too, you could. You could make your own little Photoshop 16 by 16, save it as a PNG or a dot. I think there are a couple sites out there where you can take a PNG file and you can convert it into a .ico file, which is for favicon, and then you just drop it back here in your images folder. So we're going to go back to our little trash, and we're going to put it back into our images folder. So yeah, you can actually use PNG. This is fine. I don't think you need to use icon, the .ico file. I think that was a while back. But if I refresh this page now, there it is. There's that favicon. But a lot of people actually build their websites also from scratch. And you can too, actually, if you wanted to. You didn't have to actually download Skeleton. You could have just gone to your desktop and created a new folder here. You could have called it My Website. And we'll just give it another name because My Website's already taken. So we'll just say EX for example. Now you'll notice that I have here on my Finder, I've got my website. This is the one that I changed from Skeleton. Originally it was called Skeleton. This one I changed to My Website. This is an empty folder that I just created now, and this is the final one. So let's focus here. So you'll see there's nothing here. So there's no way for me to view anything at this moment, like on my browser. I would need an index.html file or some sort of HTML file, like I explained before. So to do that, I could just go over to Sublime, and then I could create a new file, and let's just go ahead and put HTML head body /body to close it /HTML to close out the HTML file. And what I'm doing here is I'm basically rewriting all of that skeleton code that allows me to view a web page, but I'm just doing it by hand. Like if you had no skeleton to work with, you had to write everything by hand. And then let's not forget that doc type. Some people do actually, which is why you want to use a framework like Skeleton. I'll put also a title tag. So again, this is the basics of how to write your own simple index page. And we'll put like here, hello, this is some content. Okay, we'll save it. So Command S. And then this time we're going to go over to My Website, and we're going to call this index.html. Now let's close it. Now we can see, like when we close it, if I were to close out this Finder and I just come back to the desktop and I open this up, you can see there's that index.html file, and here's our skeleton's index.html file, which represents this page. If I were to click this one and open it with Safari, well, here's what I get. Notice the difference between the two. Let me close this out real quick. Close all that. So here's the page from here. So if I open it with Safari, you can see that. And here's the page from our example folder. This is what we just made just now by creating a new folder on the desktop and then creating a new file called index.html. In our last movie, we made a new folder that was called My Website Example EX, and we made an index.html file, and we opened it. If we open it with Sublime Text, we can see here's the code we wrote out. This is how a lot of people actually build websites. They just kind of create a new folder on their desktop. They write an index.html file using Sublime. Then some people also create a file called the style CSS, and like say we'll call this style CSS. And that this little thing here just means comment. More about it later, but we'll save this. We'll just say style.css, and we'll make a new folder actually while we're at it, and we'll call it CSS, create it, and then we'll put style.css. So now we've got an index.html and a style.css file. So if I wanted to add a link to this style file, otherwise without it the HTML file wouldn't see the style. Like let's say I wanted to make the body, so in our style file, style.css file, if we want to make the entire body, the entire HTML body, all of the font color to be red, we could do something like this: color, then colon, then red. Save it, and if we refresh this page, well, nothing happens because this page doesn't know that the style page exists. So in order to do that, remember our head tag is where we put links. So link to, so to write a to statement, you actually use the word href. href style.css. And you can also add a rel tag or rel attribute, which just kind of means that this is a style sheet. This is how a lot of people do this. And then you can just end the tag here. You don't have to write link and then link like this. Most people write link with the end tag. This is just something that you would have to remember when you're typing HTML. So now if I save this file and come back here, oops, we didn't get it. So let's check why. So if you remember, I saved the style file in the CSS folder. This is actually a good mistake because a lot of people will save style files and they'll be like, why doesn't it show up? So we have to add here CSS, then / style CSS. So what we're doing is we're defining where exactly this file lives. When we start at the index file, we're actually at the top of the folder, inside the folder. This style file is here. If I were to drag this file here, and then I were to just say style.css and save, then the entire thing would turn red. And that's good. That's what we want. But a lot of people put their style files inside the CSS folder. And this is good because you want to organize your files. Later you might have another folder like a JS folder, which is where you put all of your JavaScript files. You might have another folder where you put images. This is where you put all of your images. So when you're using HTML, you want to know, well, what folder does it belong in? And then you want to start with the folder name, and then you add the file extension. So we're going to do that here because the style file is now in the CSS folder. Without this, the index page would not know how to load it. So we'll go ahead, we'll reload this page, and we can see the content is still red. And if I were to change it to green, well, now it's green. And that's kind of how, like, you can build your own, Scratch project from scratch. Well, it sounded so. This is how you can basically build your own page using just basic new folder. Then you want to create the index.html. Then you want to add your style.css. But let's say you want to save time. You really don't want to like write all this out, and maybe you're not even sure, like, you're not confident that the way you're writing it is perfect, like, or is up to date with today's standards. That's why you would use something like skeleton. So coming back to the skeleton, the one that we downloaded from the internet, and let's revisit again with our Sublime text. You can see all of that stuff that we wrote in our video before. It's all written here, but it's a lot nicer. See, before I wrote the doc type in lowercase, now this time it's written in uppercase, so that is probably the correct way to write a doc type. Here we've got that lang n, which means the page is going to be viewed in English. We've got our link tags, links to our styles, normalized CSS, and if we open our CSS folder, we can see the normalized and the skeleton CSS. And it's nice. It's all written out for us. It also gives us a link to like some fonts. Actually, for our example today, though, I'm going to comment out this because we don't need this. So in order to comment, you can just, from your keyboard, command and /. If I were to hit command / again, it would uncomment. And what comment means is it basically makes, when the page renders, this comment tells the browser to skip this line and not render anything. I mean, it'll still read the line, but it won't output this to HTML, which is nice because you might need comments at some point. Like if you are trying to do testing or disabling some functions. Let's say I wanted to turn off these CSS files too. Then by moving my mouse over it like I did here, and then hitting command /, it basically kind of toggles it. It's like this is on mode, this is off. And by turning it off, and if I save it, if I refresh, actually I want to go here because remember, we're no longer in our example folder, but we're actually in our website folder. So we'll close this out. If I refresh this, notice those styles are gone. And if I were to uncomment this, again, this is a feature built into Sublime. This is why I like Sublime Text. You can comment and uncomment. You can also do this with TextMate too. If I were to save it now on its on mode, well, those styles come back, which is nice. So this is a fast way of like just kind of, if you get a new template and you want to see what things do, you can go around and you can start commenting out lines and then uncommenting them. And you can see what each line does and if it's beneficial to your site at all. If I were to comment this line here, the fav icon, I would no longer get that image fav icon. It's still written there, as you can see, but no longer will show, and I'll prove it to you by opening it again with our Firefox. It's gone. And if I were to enable it, uncomment, there it is. So a little bit of review from the last session, but it's kind of nice. So again, all of your content goes inside. For when you build web pages, you want to make sure you adhere to the structure. You want to have a div for, like every single, you don't want to overdo it with divs, but like as a best practice, you want to have a div tag. And a div tag just basically means a division. Like every element on your HTML page is kind of considered like a full block. It goes all the way to the end of the screen, or as far as this browser will go. And then within a div, you've got basically the content that goes inside. Then all around it, you've got padding and a border, and then you've got a margin. More on this later, but all of these divs, even this one, can be styled, and the content can be changed with inside. We saw that by typing it here, but you could also style this content itself. You can make this color red, you can make it bold, you could make it way bigger, you could do all kinds of stuff, like whatever you want, as long as you know what the element is and like where it is in relation to the page. Knowing those two things will help you be able to target any element on this page and give it whatever style you want. So just for simplicity, you want to use divs. Divs are the way that you organize the way the structure of the page is going to lay out. Then within those divs, you want to put in your elements like your heading tag, which is basically what starts the HTML section. So this section is the portfolio section. If I were to copy and paste this, let's just go ahead and copy this, and we'll create another 1/2 column, and we'll call it sidebar, and then we'll just say this is the sidebar. Then we've got two divs sitting next to each other. If I were to do something like this, like if I were to say div, my div, and this is outside the skeleton framework, my div would sit here. And notice, like, because my div doesn't have any of the skeleton attributes on it, it just sits out here and basically just kind of like doesn't have any of this padding, or like padding just means like it doesn't have any of these spacings around it. So if I delete that, then save it, and it's no longer there. The nice thing about skeleton is that with skeleton, it gives you kind of ways to organize your content, or the way it's going to appear on the page. So you notice that I've got a div called a container and then a div called a row. And in skeleton, like, again, the divs are lines, like that every div takes up a line on the page. So if I were to use the skeleton framework, which is div class row, you could imagine instead of the div being a line that takes up the entire page, you could think of it as a row, like in a table. Just like tables have rows and columns. The way skeleton define their framework is you could have a row, and then inside of that row you have a column. And then this column is going to take up 1/2 of the space. So that's 1/2, that's 1/2. You'll ask, well, if it's really 1/2, why doesn't the content start here and here? Well, that's because this starts in a container, and that's part of the CSS rule that belongs to skeleton. This container here is actually got a certain width, and it's got a certain spacing. So everything that's inside the container gets fitted here. I'm going to introduce you to a tool right now that shows you how all of these things are sorted. If you were to right click on any of these elements, like if you were to right click anywhere here and inspect the element, you'll get this little web inspector toolbox. And if you're on Chrome, you want to definitely go here. We'll just navigate back to this. Open with Chrome, and we're going to inspect the element again. And this time it'll give us a developer tools. Close that real quick. Open with Firefox. And this one is also inspect element, so they're all the same. You get the inspector. So whichever one you use, just follow along. I like Safari again because it's faster than Chrome and Firefox. And it's just what I'm used to actually, but I can use all of them. But basically, this little web inspector here kind of outlines to you, it shows you all of the HTML that was written, that got processed by the browser. And it's really, really helpful because you can see like everything that you need to know. You don't necessarily have to have Sublime open. You can just look at the inspector for a page, and you can do this for any web page on a browser, by the way. But by opening up this inspector, you can kind of see, all of the HTML information again, just like you would here, but you're seeing it in this inspector. And the nice thing about the inspector is you can change stuff too, just like you could in Sublime. So if I were to change your portfolio back to my portfolio, and it changes it for me. And if I said, hey, I want to open up this sidebar here, the flashing actually it shows you where what's been highlighted, what's been selected. So if I click sidebar and I say I want to call this inspector now, well then that turns into inspector. Now the useful thing about this inspector is that, and we'll go into more detail with it later, the inspector is nice for like inspecting, all of the elements on the page and seeing what kind of rules are attributed to that element, or the elements in particular that you want to look at. So our question was, why is this, if it's supposed to be half the page, one half of a column inside of a row, why doesn't it just start here, and then why doesn't this one end here? So if we look at our inspector again, we can check the container, and our container has a width of 80%. And without getting too crazy with CSS right now, just understand that stuff. If I were to take out this margin 0 auto, then there would no longer be a centering of those elements. With this, you can center elements to the center of the page with a margin 0 auto. And I can control the width of the page too by just like typing here 60%, 40%. So if you look over here too, you can see that this container, this is a class, this is a CSS class that was attributed to this div. This was written in our skeleton.css file. So if I click here, I can see the skeleton CSS file, and it'll take me to that container, and I can take a look at it more depth over here. I can also do this in Chrome. So coming back to Chrome, and opening this file with Chrome, and inspecting the element, and if I come to the container, I can see the rules there. And the nice thing about Chrome that I actually like about this is that you can you can actually double click on the percentage, and you can change it like on the fly with your keyboard just by pressing the key up or down. So if I press keyboard up, I can change the width. If I press the keyboard down, it can decrease the width. It's kind of nice. There's the one thing about Chrome that I like that is missing from Safari, but yeah, play around with it. I think Firefox has some neat features too. And again, if you wanted to style these elements, you could go into each one. You could say for this H4, make the color red, and then it's turned red. So we'll get into CSS in a bit, but I just wanted you to see you could use the inspector to kind of check out these elements, and also, how with these elements and these class rules that were built in particularly by Skeleton. And if you wanted to view the Skeleton CSS files, you could just right click on this file and open it with Sublime just like we did, and you could look at all these rules. These rules, like you see here, this column is what is actually being set onto the HTML tag itself. So when the tag has the rule that's called column or 1/2, then you can see, well, where's that rule coming from? Well, it's coming from here. The 1/2 dot column is width 48%, and that's why this width takes up 48% of the container. Remember, the container itself was a width of 80%, and that's why the width is in between here. If I were to refresh this page, we'll get like the original width of the container and then the original 1/2 columns. So recap, you want to just make sure that you understand all of the tags and tag information, remember all of the link stuff, all of the descriptions for the page go in your head tag, and then all of the content for your body goes inside the div tags inside the body. And remember, you always close out your tags for every one of these tags, except for tags like the link tag, which auto close by themselves. And the nice thing again is that if you don't know this stuff, you can always use a framework, which is why I advocate using the skeleton, because then it'll write it out for you and it'll save you time. So I think that's enough now, for how how a page is built and how it gets viewed in a browser. Now we're going to get our hands a little bit more dirty and actually start building the original portfolio site that I showed you here in our final example.